Recording.
Okay, so tell us your name
Robert Myers.
and today's date.
October 26, 2019.
And so you're going to talk a little bit about how you got involved. And, you know, we were part of United People's Organization that eventually became part of Rising Up Angry. So we'll just talk about United People's Organization mainly. And how did you first get involved? And why did you get involved?
I first got involved with United People's Organization and Rising Up Angry as a result of the Vietnam War. But probably more importantly, I read an essay called 2,000 Years of Struggle, and it talked about the history of Vietnam dealing with colonial powers. First, I think it was the French, then the English, and then the United States. And that, to me, was so shocking to realize, you know, growing up, you think, oh, America's the greatest place in the world. We're so fair-handed with everybody. When I read that essay, I was kind of stunned to realize that we were this big, massive industrial military power just really trying to steal somebody else's land. And then that caused me to sort of like evaluate and realize that the United States kind of was the same sort of story. You know, this land all belonged to the Indians. We came in and basically stole it from them after we murdered about 3 million people. So I gained a sense of like empathy, I think, for the condition that millions of people around the world experience at our expense.
And so tell us a little bit about what you remember with United People's Organization and what kind of things were you involved with and what was memorable about it and important?
Like one of the things that I always remember and I tell people about UPO, and that's what we refer to it as, is one of the things that even today, as I look back, I see it as really cutting edge, is the food co-op that was done. And it was done initially, I believe, through a local church, because the pastor was really sympathetic to just everything that we believed in. And that, on top of just the selling of the Rising Up Angry paper, and just creating a kind of a network and an atmosphere in the community about change, because at that, you know, back then, that was sort of the first wave of change, I think, that that America had seen probably since FDR. And so I just think I really value that sort of sense of community that doesn't really exist as much today. But
tell us about the food co-op. Why was that significant to you?
Well,
what was it? Tell us about that.
You know, it was. I remember we used to. I think there was one part of it. A lot of the food was, I think, orders were taken, if I recall, and then there was a whole team of people that went somewhere down in the city, and I don't remember exactly, but went down in the city, got a lot of the vegetables and everything, and even then, you know, I thought it was cool that it was it was very very organic in the sense that it was just normal food. You know, it wasn't all this, wasn't all the processed junk, and so I kind of looked at that as being a really positive thing, and I just think it was a great tool to get people to see that people that were against the war or revolutionaries were just normal people. They weren't these baby-eating commies that was kind of projected through the media and just the propaganda at the time.
And what about your relationships with other people in the organization and the structure of the organization? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I think probably one thing that I always kind of, that I did remember is, you know, we hear a lot of talk, we hear about a meritocracy, you know, that if you work hard or if you do things, you'll get someplace in, you know, our current American culture. And one thing that I always enjoyed about the environment of being around Rising Up Angry and UPO is if you worked well with people, if you had ideas, if you were genuine, if you had passion, if you wanted to make a difference, there was a whole mechanism or a whole atmosphere to where you'd be noticed, you'd be recognized, and sort of the self-interest realities of today didn't exist back then as much in that organization, anyways.
And have you stayed in touch with anybody from UPO?
I have, and it's really been more of a, like say I'll use an example like on Facebook. I think that as I got older and sort of the progressive or the revolutionary politics of that time started to fade a little bit, I still maintained my core principles such that I was always around people that were around those things. In other words, like a couple of people that were a part of it then were the Kodiak sisters, and I'd maintained interaction with them. I actually dated one of them for a while, and so and all the other people that I associated with, they were people who met sort of the basic principles I acquired through being around Rising Up Angry. Those principles, those values helped me to pick who I associated with. If I got around somebody that was just out for themselves, all they had was a vision of a corporate dream or whatever, I kind of saw those folks as being really shallow. So I think that's one of the things that endured. I always knew to be around people that were progressively minded. They could look at the bigger picture.
And so you maintain your values and also who you wanted to be around. What about work or other kinds of things over your lifetime? Do you feel like your early days in UPO shaped sort of what came after your work, your passions?
Actually, yes and no. Because I kind of did a 180 and decided, okay, I got to get a legitimate job type of thing. So I went to college, ended up kind of in a corporate role, and for the most part, the roles that I had they had some value to me because I believed I was doing somewhat of a good thing, but that all kind of turned around in the last corporate job I had, which was in pharmaceuticals, and I realized that it all kind of came rushing back at me, and I realized that all the pharmaceutical industry are drug pushers that could do it legally, and I began to realize that when I saw the only thing that mattered was the money. And any kind of safety issues, just where you don't talk about that kind of thing. So I think it was my principles from my early days in Rising Up Angry that caused me to realize the corporate world was a blood-sucking, black hole of hell. And then when I got downsized, at first I was a little bummed out, but I actually rediscovered sort of my interest in other things, like cabinet making and woodworking, and that's what I'm doing now, and it's actually better.
And for youth today, what lessons from being involved with UPO, what would you like to share to youth today about your past and present?
I think one of the main things, and this might sound a little, cliche, but it's sort of like question things and be curious about things. We live in an era where technology can bombard people about something so much that people tend to just be the recipients of information, and they never really process it. They just kind of are overwhelmed by it and think, it must be true because they're saying it so much. And it's like I tell my kids, question things. Don't, it's that old saying, believe only half of what you see and none of what you hear. And that little adage to me is just be curious. Just kind of ask questions about, when you hear something, and it makes you think of one thing, you ought to realize, well, maybe that's the speaker wants you to think that, but that may not be the truth. It's sort of like when you see a car ad, and it makes you think it's the greatest thing in the world, and how many cars you got to buy before you realize, it gets old after a while. Well, it's because you got pitched and sold on something. Life is like that. You got to question things. You got to ask questions, and you got to stay true to your principles and find out what your principles are. Hold on to them and stay true to them.